What you are about to view could mean the difference between life and death, survival and a cruel, suffering end. Not just for you, but for your loved ones as well. When nuclear war comes, and it is not a question of if, but when, don't be the one who has to look at your loved ones and say you did nothing to protect them. We are going to look at the effects of nuclear war. Not what Hollywood tells you, nor what the doomsayers advertise. We're going to look at scientific facts and history and tell you what you need to know to protect those who are most valuable to you, your family. Stay informed. Stay alert. Stay prepared. This is the DEFCON warning system. Since 1984, the DEFCON warning system has monitored and analyzed the global nuclear threat. Stay informed, subscribe to our channel for the latest alerts and briefings. You can read our full articles at defconwarningsystem.com and join the discussion with staff and the public at community.defconwarningsystem.com. The belief that no one could survive a nuclear war took root during the Cold War, fueled by terrifying media portrayals and widespread misunderstandings of nuclear science. In the mid-20th century, films and books painted nuclear conflict as a guaranteed doomsday. For example, the 1959 novel/film On the Beach depicted the last humans awaiting extinction in Australia after global fallout slowly poisoned every corner of Earth. Decades later, the BBC's 1984 docudrama Threads delivered an unflinchingly hopeless vision of post-nuclear Britain, with one retrospective noting there is truly nothing in Threads to spark hope, no tentative signs of life returning, even after many years. Such cultural touchstones, along with U.S. TV movie The Day After, 1983, and others, seared into the public consciousness the idea that nuclear war equals the end of civilization. Beyond fiction, some scientific theories and rhetoric in the 1980s reinforced fatalism. The concept of nuclear winter, popularized by astronomer Carl Sagan and others, warned that firestorms from burning cities would loft so much soot that sunlight would be blotted out worldwide, leading to global crop failure and mass starvation. Though nuclear winter research was, and remains, serious science, early models were laden with worst-case assumptions that were often lost in translation to the public. For instance, the original 1983 TAP study assumed that 5% of urban fires would become massive firestorms injecting black smoke 60,000 feet high. This helped create a vision of an uncontrollable conflagration ending all life. In reality, whether such extreme firestorms would occur so widely is uncertain, but the nuanced caveats were overshadowed by sensational headlines. Similarly, misunderstandings about radiation fed public terror. Early atomic bomb reporting and even some scientists mistakenly compared fallout to an eternal poison that would permanently contaminate the entire globe. Many assumed that areas hit by nukes would remain radioactive for centuries, a misconception later debunked by observing Hiroshima/Nagasaki's recovery. Thus, by the late Cold War, a narrative of total doom prevailed. If the missiles flew, it was thought, our planet would become an uninhabitable wasteland. Governments at times even tacitly encouraged this fatalism. For example, the doctrine of mutual assured destruction leaned on the fear of absolute annihilation to deter war. Yet not everyone agreed that survival was impossible. Civil defense experts and historians noted that humans had already witnessed horrific destruction: Hiroshima, Nagasaki, dozens of nuclear tests, and life still continued. As we'll explore, the facts paint a far more hopeful picture than the fatalistic lore. First, let's dismantle the most common myths about nuclear war's aftermath. It's time to confront several popular claims about nuclear war that have been repeated so often, they're taken as truth. In reality, these are myths, debunked by science, history, and expert analysis. Myth: a nuclear war would make Earth completely uninhabitable. Fact: even a full-scale nuclear exchange, while catastrophic, would not wipe out all human life or render the entire planet unlivable. Key for you.com. Crescent Carney: A civil defense scientist at Oak Ridge National Laboratory emphasized that an all-out nuclear war would be far from the end of human life on Earth. History supports this. After the atomic bombings of 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were rebuilt and are thriving cities today, with radiation levels now indistinguishable from normal background. Areas at ground zero were not permanently poisoned. Most fallout decayed rapidly, allowing survivors to safely return and rebuild. Likewise, extensive nuclear weapons testing in the 1950s, 60s did not turn the Earth into a radioactive desert. Hundreds of above-ground test explosions, over 500 megatons total yield, injected fallout into the environment, yet life continued. In fact, the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, UNSCR, found that residual fallout from those tests contributes less than 1% of the average person's annual radiation dose today. The other 99% comes from natural background sources and medical uses. Simply put, nuclear war would wreak havoc on human society and the environment, but it is not an extinction event for mankind or other life. Many regions would remain habitable, especially outside primary target zones. Myth: radiation from fallout would blanket the entire globe and linger forever. Fact: fallout radiation is intense, but temporary and geographically patchy, not a permanent worldwide blanket. When a nuclear bomb detonates near the ground, it sucks up pulverized soil and debris into the mushroom cloud, forming radioactive particles that later fall back to Earth as fallout. These particles can travel downwind for hundreds of miles, but they do not evenly cover the globe. Fallout plumes typically form long, narrow footprints based on wind patterns. Some areas downwind of blasts would get heavy fallout deposition, while other areas, even relatively close, might get little to none, depending on wind and weather. Crucially, fallout's deadliness fades quickly over time. Most of the radioisotopes in fallout have short half-lives. They emit a burst of radiation and then decay into stable elements or far less radioactive forms. The 7 to 10 rule of thumb in civil defense states that for every 7-fold increase in time, the radiation dose rate from fallout drops by a factor of 10. In practical terms, 07 hours after fallout arrives, its radiation intensity is about 1/10 of the initial level. 48 hours, 2 days later, it's roughly 1/100th of the initial level. After 2 weeks, it falls to around 1/1000th of the initial level, or even less, depending on the mix of isotopes. This rapid decay means fallout is most dangerous in the first hours and days following an explosion, not forever. Authorities estimate that in areas with heavy fallout, people might need to shelter for a few days up to 2 weeks until radiation drops to safer levels. But it will drop. As one nuclear engineer explains, if you look at all the radioactivity, at 1 day, it's decayed by a factor of 100,000, at 10 days by a factor of 1 million, at 10 years, down by 1 billion. In short, fallout does not render land permanently uninhabitable in most cases. Even the lingering longer-lived isotopes, like CS-137 with a 30-year half-life, become diluted in the environment and can be managed. The main risk is the acute radiation in the initial fallout cloud. By taking shelter and avoiding exposure during that intense initial period, survivors can largely avoid lethal doses. We have tragic but instructive examples. The Fukushima nuclear accident, while not a weapon, it spread radioactive material, showed that with evacuation and time, affected areas can recover. And as noted, Hiroshima's radiation dissipated so much that within a couple of decades the city was reoccupied and today is perfectly safe. Myth: nuclear firestorms will engulf everything and nothing can be done to escape them. Fact: a nuclear explosion can ignite enormous fires, especially in urban areas, but firestorms will be limited to the blast zones, not a planet-wide inferno. In a large nuclear strike, many cities could suffer devastating fires, like the firestorm that consumed Hiroshima's city center. However, these fires do not automatically merge into one global fire nor spread indefinitely. They burn out once they run out of fuel in the local area. The worst-case scenario for fires is if many burning cities inject so much soot into the upper atmosphere that sunlight is blocked, the nuclear winter theory. But even in those models, it's not the fire itself killing everyone. It's the indirect climate effect on agriculture. Moreover, not every nuclear detonation will create a firestorm. Weather conditions, city layout, and bomb type matter. For example, a bomb exploded high in the air maximizes blast, but causes less debris and fire on the ground. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs were airbursts that caused intense fires directly under them, but little long-range fallout. A surface burst, conversely, kicks up more fallout, but its blast covers a smaller area and it may start fewer fires beyond ground zero. Modern strategic war plans might involve airbursts for wide blast damage on cities and ground bursts on hardened missile silos, causing heavy fallout in downwind rural areas. In either case, the fires, while devastating locally, would not destroy all life. There are countless scenarios where people outside the immediate fire zone survive. Historically, in Hiroshima, some concrete buildings and basements at the edge of the blast remained intact, sheltering survivors from both the blast and fires. Fire is a major hazard. One more reason to shelter, underground if possible, and avoid wooden structures if you can, but it is not inescapable. Survival often comes down to location and timing. Those caught in a raging firestorm at ground zero sadly have little chance, but people even a few miles away can be safe from the flames. And by reducing flammable clutter, knowing fire evacuation routes, one can improve odds of escaping urban fires. Overall, nuclear war would ignite many fires, but not a single firestorm consuming the world. Life would endure outside the burn zones. Myth: a nuclear winter would starve everyone by eliminating all food production. Fact: nuclear winter is a serious risk, but it is not a guaranteed human extinction event. The theory predicts that smoke from nuclear fires could cool the planet for months or years, harming agriculture. Recent studies indeed suggest a large nuclear war, for instance, U.S./Russia exchanging a few thousand warheads, could inject hundreds of teragrams of soot into the stratosphere, potentially causing an average surface cooling of a few degrees Celsius and shortening growing seasons for a decade. This would likely cause famine in parts of the world. However, it would not literally eliminate all agriculture and food production everywhere. Even under severe climate cooling, some regions, especially in the tropics or indoors/greenhouses, could still grow certain crops. Food stockpiles, if managed, could buffer the impact. People are resourceful. Post-war survivors could shift to hardier crops like potatoes, wheat, or mushrooms that can grow in low light, and cooperative rationing. It's also worth noting that there is significant uncertainty in nuclear winter models. They rely on assumptions about how many cities burn and how much soot makes it to high altitude. As mentioned, early models assumed a substantial portion of urban fuel would fully combust and loft soot into the stratosphere. More recent research still predicts severe effects, but not all scientists agree on the extent. Some climatologists label worst-case scenarios as low probability, suggesting outcomes might range from a modest nuclear autumn, a few cool growing seasons, to a severe multi-year winter. The bottom line: a large nuclear war could indeed inflict a global food emergency, but humanity has a chance to adapt and survive, especially if we prepare by storing food and developing resilient agriculture, e.g. hydroponics, indoor farming, as a contingency. It would be incredibly hard, but not beyond all hope. This is why promoting preparedness is so important, rather than assuming all is lost. Myth: civilization would collapse forever. There's no coming back from nuclear war. Fact: a full-scale nuclear war would undoubtedly shatter the global economy and kill a large fraction of the population in involved nations. It could thrust survivors into a period of hardship and societal breakdown. Yet history and analysis indicate that civilization would eventually recover, especially if some preparations are in place. Carney and other experts point out that even if an unprepared nation were hit with an all-out attack, many millions would survive and could live through the difficult post-attack years. Human knowledge and skills would not be wiped out overnight. Even in the ruins, survivors would remember technology and could salvage resources. While one should not romanticize the post-nuclear world, it would be grim and challenging. It's not correct to assume an irreversible slide into a new Stone Age. Parts of the world might be spared direct attack and could help reboot critical systems. For instance, during the Cold War, it was expected that less targeted countries or remote areas could provide a refuge to preserve cultural and technical knowledge. The recovery might take decades or centuries, but humans are extraordinarily resilient. Think of past global catastrophes. The Black Death in the 14th century killed up to half of Europe's people, yet society rebounded. In the 20th century, world wars destroyed cities and claimed tens of millions of lives, yet civilization not only survived but advanced. Nuclear war, as terrible as it would be, is likewise survivable in the long run if we do our utmost to save lives, protect infrastructure where possible, and rebuild in the aftermath. Believing in inevitable doom becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Instead, we must acknowledge the possibility of survival and plan for it. As the DEFCON warning system advises, don't be taken in by the defeatists who say no one will survive nuclear war. Knowledge, preparation, and cooperation could ensure that some level of civilization endures. In summary, nuclear war is not a death sentence for humanity. It is a disaster we earnestly hope never happens, but if it does, many people can survive. By dispelling these myths of unsurvivability, we empower ourselves to take action. Indeed, fatalism can be lethal. If people assume there's no hope, they won't prepare or even try to live through it. The truth is that even in an all-out nuclear war, the majority of the population, especially those outside immediate blast zones, could survive with proper shelter and supplies. The challenges would be immense, but not insurmountable. In the next sections, we'll paint a realistic picture of what such a war might entail, and then outline how you and your family can improve your odds of survival through practical steps. It's difficult to imagine the unthinkable, but doing so pragmatically, without the exaggerated Hollywood lens, helps us prepare. So, let's break down the likely effects of a large nuclear exchange based on scientific models and historical data. We will consider direct blast damage, thermal radiation, fire, fallout patterns, and potential climate effects, grounding each in realistic parameters rather than apocalyptic hyperbole. In a nuclear detonation, the immediate effects are a blinding flash, intense heat, a crushing blast wave, and instant radiation. These effects are most severe near ground zero, diminishing with distance. How far out you are from a blast largely determines your fate in the first minutes. For a sense of scale, a 1 megaton nuclear explosion, equivalent to 1 million tons of TNT, larger than most warheads in today's arsenals, might completely destroy virtually everything within a radius of about 1 to 2 miles. Nukepills.com. Reinforced concrete buildings would be rubble, and the fireball, larger than a city center, would vaporize anything at the core. Between about 2 and 5 miles out, there would still be severe blast damage and fires. Many buildings would collapse or burn, though some sturdier structures might remain partly standing. People in this zone could suffer fatal injuries from collapsing buildings, flying debris, and burns. However, beyond roughly 5 to 8 miles, for a 1 metric ton blast in clear weather, the blast pressure drops significantly. Light damage, shattered windows, knocked over light structures, might extend out to or beyond that range, but not the total devastation seen at ground zero. Importantly, if you're outside the intense burn radius, you can survive the initial detonation, especially if you take cover. Most nuclear weapons today are actually smaller yield, 100 to 500 kilotons for many strategic warheads. A 100 KT blast, for instance, would have a smaller destruction radius, perhaps total destruction within 1 mile, heavy damage out to 2 to 3 miles, and so on. Modern missiles carry multiple smaller warheads to spread out damage rather than one giant bomb. What this means is that for any given blast, distance is life. If you're just a few miles away, your chances of surviving the initial effects increase dramatically. Civil defense analysts during the Cold War calculated that the majority of people in a city, even as targeted as Moscow or New York, would actually survive the immediate blast if they weren't right next to ground zero. For example, in the US FEMA's 1985 planning guide, the agency noted that most people within a few miles of an exploding weapon would be killed or seriously injured. People in the lighter damage areas would be endangered by blast and heat effects. However, millions of people are located away from potential targets. For them, as well as for survivors in the lighter damage areas, radioactive fallout would be the main danger. In other words, even a massive attack on cities leaves a large ring of survivors on the periphery whose biggest worry will be fallout, not the blast itself. Thermal radiation, the heat flash from a nuclear explosion, can ignite fires and cause severe burns at considerable distances. On a clear day, third-degree burns on exposed skin might occur out to several miles from a large blast. Fires can be started by the flash itself, especially in flammable materials like paper, dry wood, leaves, and by secondary causes, overturned stoves, broken gas lines, etc. If many fires start and grow, a firestorm can occur in the hardest-hit urban core, a self-fueling blaze sucking in oxygen. Hiroshima experienced such a firestorm, which consumed roughly 4.4 square miles of the city. But beyond the firestorm zone, the heat diminishes. Survivors just outside the burn radius often avoided serious fire damage, especially if they were indoors or in shadow when the flash hit. The concept of duck and cover is relevant. Getting behind cover or even lying flat can protect from the flash and flying debris. After the flash, fires will spread through exposed combustibles, but as noted earlier, they do not automatically engulf everything. Many urban areas won't sustain a single huge fire. Instead, there will be patchy fires. Rain or snow, if the weather is bad, can even suppress some fires. Strategic nuclear strikes on missile silos or military sites in rural areas might start almost no fires, since there's little fuel there, though they will kick up a lot of dirt and fallout. One more point: initial nuclear radiation, instant gamma rays and neutrons released in the first minute, is lethal near the bomb, but it doesn't reach far. Typically, the radius for prompt radiation that can kill is on the order of 1 to 1.5 miles for a 1 metric ton burst, less for smaller bombs. This effect is overshadowed by the blast/heat footprint. Basically, if you get a lethal dose of initial radiation, you are likely close enough to be killed by the blast anyway. So prompt radiation is a concern mostly for people in the moderate damage band, e.g. in a basement 1.2 miles from ground zero. You might survive the blast and fire, but still receive a heavy radiation dose. However, initial radiation intensity falls off very sharply with distance, and most strategic nukes are high-yield enough that the lethal radiation zone is smaller than the blast zone. Fallout radiation, which we discuss next, is the more widespread threat to those who survive the first minutes. After the bomb's flash and shockwave, a new threat develops: radioactive fallout. This is the mixture of dust and debris made radioactive by the explosion, which begins to fall back to Earth minutes to hours later. Fallout is highly dangerous. It can expose people to life-threatening radiation doses if they remain in it unprotected. But it behaves in fairly predictable ways, which means we can plan for it and avoid most of the exposure. Where and when does fallout fall? It depends on the weapon and the wind. A nuclear airburst, detonation well above the ground, produces much less fallout because it doesn't suck up Earth material. The fireball doesn't touch the ground. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were airbursts, and consequently those cities had relatively low residual radiation after the bombing. A surface burst, or a bomb that explodes near ground level, is the big fallout maker. It vaporizes tons of soil/building material and makes it radioactive. The fallout particles range from large sand or pebble-sized to microscopic ash. The largest chunks fall close to the blast, within the first few tens of miles, usually within an hour. The finer particles get carried by upper-level winds and can travel hundreds or even thousands of miles before settling, coming down over the course of hours to days, often aided by rain. Radioactive particles will get caught in rain clouds and come down in black, hot rain. Wind patterns are crucial. Generally, in mid-latitudes, winds blow west to east, so fallout often drifts eastward. But winds can shift, and at different altitudes may blow in different directions. So a single explosion's fallout might create a cigar or plume-shaped contaminated zone mostly downwind, with patchy deposits further out. In a full-scale war with many bombs, multiple fallout plumes would form, potentially overlapping. Some areas could get heavy fallout from several nearby blasts. Others might be spared if they're upwind or crosswind of major targets. The unpredictability of winds makes it impossible to know in advance exactly who will get fallout, which is why everyone, nationwide, should be prepared to take shelter after an attack warning. Even hundreds of miles from any target, there's a chance winds could drop diluted fallout on you. For instance, U.S. nuclear test fallout in the 1950s unexpectedly reached New England in small amounts. But the farther from the blast, generally the less intense the contamination. How dangerous is fallout? Fresh, heavy fallout is extremely radioactive. Right after the explosion, the radiation dose rates in the fallout cloud can be thousands of roentgens per hour. A roentgen is a unit roughly equal to 1 radian or 0.01 gray in tissue for gamma rays. 500 plus roentgens absorbed in a short time is often lethal to humans. Without shelter, anyone caught in that kind of high fallout area in the first hour could receive a fatal dose within hours. However, and this is critical, the intensity drops very quickly. As described earlier, fallout follows an exponential decay curve. Civil defense manuals emphasize staying in shelter for at least the first 24 to 48 hours, when over half of the total radiation exposure will occur in a heavily contaminated area. After 2 days, the dose rate might be just 1% of the initial. After 2 weeks, 0.1%. So the strategy is simple: wait it out. In practical terms, if you have a good shelter that reduces radiation, you might only get, say, 1/20th or 1/100th of the outside radiation dose while you're inside. By the time you emerge a couple days later, the outside levels themselves will have fallen dramatically. Let's put some numbers on survivability. The amount of radiation a person absorbs is measured in rem or sieverts. 1 sievert equals 100 rem. Older literature often uses rem, or the roughly equivalent unit, R, for exposure. Acute radiation sickness becomes likely if you receive about 100 to 200 rem, 1 to 2 sieverts, or more in a short time. A dose of around 450 to 500 rem, 4.5 to 5 sieverts, within a few days can be lethal to 50% of people without medical care. Higher doses, 600 plus rem or 6 sieverts, are usually fatal without advanced treatment. Now, a heavy fallout zone right after an explosion might have dose rates of, for example, 300 R/hour on the first day at certain spots, clearly lethal if you stayed outside in it for long. But if you shelter properly, you can avoid absorbing that dose. Your goal is to keep your total exposure as low as possible, ideally under 100 R, 1 sievert, or much less. Fallout decay makes this feasible. For instance, say a person is downwind of a surface blast and without shelter would get 600 R total over the first 48 hours. Deadly. If that person simply stays inside a basement or other shelter that cuts radiation by 90%, their dose might drop to 60 R over 48 hours, which might cause mild sickness at most, and likely no permanent harm. If their shelter reduces exposure by 99%, which a very good shelter can, they'd get only 6 R, 0.06 sieverts, which is negligible. Even in extremely hot zones, a well-designed expedient shelter, like those in the civil defense handbooks, could be the difference between lethal exposure and survivable exposure. Fallout distribution also means that not everyone will experience high radiation. It is a localized threat. After the initial weeks, fallout danger will persist in some hotspots, places where fallout particles concentrated, e.g. downspouts, low-lying areas where rain collects radioactive dust, etc. But broadly, the environment will become safer with each passing day. By 2 weeks post-attack, most areas, except those very close to ground zeros or downwind hotspots, would be safe enough for limited travel or outdoor work with precautions. Fallout does leave longer-term contamination in soil, Isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90 can linger for years. So agriculture and water supply have to be managed carefully after a war. But these are challenges societies can address. For example, removing topsoil from fields, avoiding consumption of contaminated milk, as iodine-131 concentrates in cow's milk early on, etc., similar to how Japan managed areas affected by Fukushima. In summary, the fallout threat is deadly serious, but it is one we can survive by knowing where it will go, downwind, and how long it will last. Worst in first 48 hours, decaying thereafter. By combining time, distance, and shielding, the core principles of radiation protection, families can make it through the fallout period alive. We've touched on nuclear winter and myth-busting, but let's give it context. A full-scale nuclear war, thousands of fireballs over cities and forests, could inject an unprecedented amount of soot and dust into the atmosphere. Some recent studies, e.g. 2007 and 2014 papers by Robach, Toon et al., estimate a U.S.-Russia war involving approximately 150 million tons of black carbon could reduce global average surface temperature by 5 to 15 degrees Celsius for a year or two, with effects lasting up to a decade before gradually recovering. It's difficult to truly validate these models, but they are informed by analogies to volcanic eruptions and wildfires. For instance, when Mount Tambora erupted in 1815, the largest volcano in recorded history, it ejected vast quantities of aerosols, causing the Year Without a Summer, 1816. Snow fell in June in New England. Crops failed in parts of Europe. Yet humanity survived that hardship, though with famine in some regions, and climate normalized in a couple of years. Another example? The 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines lofted about 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide, cooling the Earth by approximately 0.5 degrees Celsius for a year or two. That was noticeable, but far from civilization ending. Nuclear winter scenarios are like supervolcano-scale events. More soot, less sulfur, possibly longer-lasting cooling. But even the direst calculations don't suggest literally zero sunlight or permanent winter everywhere. They suggest a deep, if temporary, chill, especially in the mid-latitudes. Equatorial regions might suffer less cooling, perhaps they become key food producers in the interim. And importantly, as weeks and months pass, natural processes, rain, wind, particle settling, gradually clear the skies. Unlike a Hollywood movie where Earth becomes an ice planet, a real nuclear winter would be a transient, if severe, climate perturbation. It would be a race for survivors to find food, relocate if needed, and adapt farming. Preparation can mitigate this. Stockpiling non-perishable food for at least 1 or 2 years could get communities through the worst harvest failures. There's also research into alternative foods, things like mushrooms grown on wood, single-cell proteins, or seaweed farming that could be ramped up if sunlight is scarce. The takeaway is not that nuclear winter would be harmless. It could kill more people via famine than the bombs themselves, according to some projections. But knowing it's a possibility means we can plan for it. Some governments have studied seed varieties that can grow in low light, cold conditions, or strategies to distribute grain reserves. It's another reason why assuming everyone will die is false. With smart planning, a portion of humanity could make it through even a nuclear winter scenario. And if a nuclear war is more limited, say 50 bombs instead of 5,000, the climate effects would likely be correspondingly milder, perhaps a few, cooler than normal years, which would be regionally disruptive, but not apocalyptic. In summary, a realistic picture of nuclear war is extremely grim, but not one of total annihilation. Direct blasts would wipe out city centers and military bases, killing millions instantly, yet tens of millions more just outside those zones would survive the initial day. Fallout would threaten millions more downwind, but with proper shelter, most of those people can avoid lethal exposure. The environment would suffer, possibly entering a nuclear autumn-winter, but some ecosystems and agriculture would persist, especially with human intervention. Civilization would be knocked down, but not knocked out. Now that we've addressed what could happen, the crucial question is, what can we do about it? The answer: prepare, respond, survive, and rebuild. Surviving a nuclear war isn't just luck or fate. Knowledge and preparation make a massive difference. The good news, if there is any in this context, is that preparing for nuclear war aligns closely with preparing for any large disaster. You need shelter, supplies, and a plan. In this section, we'll give concrete, accessible guidance for two broad scenarios your family might find itself in. If you live in an urban or targeted area, e.g., a major city near a military base or strategic site. If you live in a rural or smaller town area, away from big targets, possibly downwind of targets like missile fields. We'll cover immediate actions, like sheltering in place during the attack and fallout, and longer-term measures, evacuation, long-term self-sufficiency. We will also highlight improvised solutions. Even if you haven't built a bunker, there are steps you can take in a pinch to protect yourself from radiation and other dangers. Remember, the goal is to minimize radiation exposure. Time, distance, shielding, avoid other hazards like fire and injury, and sustain yourself until the environment stabilizes and help can arrive. If you live in a big city or near a strategic target, you face the greatest immediate risk from blast and fire. But you also likely have robust buildings around that can serve as good shelters. Here's what to do. Plan ahead for possible evacuation. Cities are targets. If international tensions are skyrocketing and war seems plausible, days or weeks before any missiles fly, consider evacuating to a less populated area if you have the means. During the Cold War, officials discussed crisis relocation, moving city populations to safer zones when war looked imminent. This is only feasible if you have some warning. Keep a go bag ready, clothes, key documents, basic supplies, and a full gas tank. Identify a destination, perhaps relatives or friends in the countryside, and multiple routes to get there. Highways might jam, so no back roads. Evacuate early. Don't wait for sirens. If an attack might happen within hours, and you're still in the city, you're better off finding shelter on the spot. You won't outrun a nuke at the last minute. But if you have a day's notice, getting out of a target zone can save your life. That said, never evacuate into a fallout plume. Have a battery radio to hear government advisories on where strikes have happened and which roads are safe. Identify the best shelter nearby. When the alert sounds, or the flash occurs, you may have only minutes if you get warning at all. Immediately get inside the nearest reliable structure. You want to put as much mass between you and the outside as possible. In urban areas, the ideal is to be underground. Basements, subway tunnels, parking garages below ground. During Cold War drills, city populations were directed into subway systems, which can provide excellent protection under many feet of concrete and earth. If you can't go underground, go to the central core of a large building. The heavier and denser the building material, the better. Concrete and brick high-rises, especially with basements, can serve as effective fallout shelters. Aim for the middle floors, e.g. in a tall apartment. Go to somewhere between the 10th and 20th floor if the building is intact post-blast, because radiation from fallout on the roof or ground will be weaker there. Stay away from windows to avoid glass shards from the blast wave. If you have any warning at all, even a few minutes, use that time wisely. Move to a basement or an interior space and bring pets and family in. Protect against fire and building collapse. One downside in cities: if your building is heavily damaged or ignites, you may not be able to stay there. Assess your shelter. If you feel the structure is unsafe, cracking, severe damage, or see a fire spreading, you may have to relocate to a safer building nearby after the blast wave passes. Do not run out during the initial blast, or you'll be exposed to debris and radiation. But once things settle, if your building is on fire or structurally unsound, put on any available covering coat, blanket over your head, and move quickly to the nearest intact shelter. It could be the concrete parking garage across the street, or a larger building that's not burning. Urban nukes can cause gas lines to rupture and fires to break out, so be ready to move if needed. Cover your mouth and nose with a cloth, ideally damp, when moving through a smoky or dusty area. If everything is flattened, worst-case scenario near ground zero, even taking cover in rubble or a ditch can help. Any thick debris between you and the sky will cut down radiation. There are accounts from Hiroshima of survivors who endured in the ruins of concrete buildings while everything around burned. It's not ideal, but do what you must to find breathable air and some shielding. Once you're in a safe structure, stay put and begin your fallout shelter routine. Use basements and subway tunnels if possible. Most urban buildings have basements. These are your friend. Being below ground can reduce radiation exposure by 90 to 99%, depending on depth and materials above. If you're in a skyscraper and it's not destroyed, go to the basement or an interior lower floor. High-rise upper floors are risky for fallout. Radioactive dust could settle on the roof and irradiate upper floors, and for winds. The lower you go, as long as it's not flooded, the better. In multi-story buildings, the middle floors, neither ground floor nor roof, often have the least radiation if fallout is on the roof and ground outside. But every building is different. Generally, put heavy dense barriers between you and outside, e.g. in an office tower, a central hallway or stairwell might be good. In a house or small building, go to a basement corner farthest from any external walls. Pile materials like furniture, books, even bags of garbage or sand against the walls to further absorb radiation. We'll go into improvised sheltering in the rural section, which also applies in the city if you have to make do. Be aware of fallout arrival. In a city, if a nuke hits, you might have a brief lull after the blast. Then within 10 to 20 minutes to an hour, fallout may begin to rain down if it was a surface burst and you're downwind. Often it looks like ash or gritty sand. It could also be invisible if it's fine particles. Do not go out to look. Stay sheltered. If you were outside when the bomb went off and survived, get inside and decontaminate. Brush off clothing, shower if possible, before the fallout arrives. Some urban areas downwind could get black rain, oily, sooty rain from the mushroom cloud, which is very radioactive. Obviously, avoid getting this on your skin or ingesting it. Listen to emergency broadcasts on radio if possible. They will give estimates of fallout zones and when it's all clear or safe to evacuate. But assume you need to hunker down for at least 24 to 48 hours unless told otherwise. Shelter living in a city. Being crammed in a basement with neighbors for a few days is tough, but survivable. Focus on ventilation, sanitation, and communication. Many people worry about running out of air. Truthfully, basements are not airtight. Enough air seeps in for a small group for quite a while. Heat and CO2 buildup are more likely issues. If there's power, use a fan. If not, you might need to ventilate manually after a few hours. Maybe crack a door briefly, or use a makeshift Kearney air pump, a simple, hand-operated fan design described in nuclear war survival skills. Do this sparingly in the first hours, because outside air will bring in fallout dust. If you have to open an external door, cover your mouth, do it, just a crack, and close it quickly. Sanitation. Have a bucket or bag for a toilet. Line it with plastic if you can. You do not want to venture out into fallout to use the bathroom. Sprinkle a little bleach or kitty litter after use to control odor. Seal and put aside waste bags. Keep the shelter as clean and dry as possible to avoid disease or attracting pests. A basic hygiene kit, hand sanitizer, wet wipes, is invaluable. If someone is injured, do basic first aid. Stop any bleeding, clean wounds, boiled or purified water if available, and keep them warm. Medical help likely won't come for a while, so the community of survivors must help each other. Security and cooperation. In a dense urban shelter, like a subway, there might be crowds of people. Cooperation is key. Organize into groups to share supplies and tasks. Appoint someone to listen to the radio broadcasts and someone to keep track of time. Important so you know when the worst 48 hours have passed. Also, be mindful of security. While we hope everyone will pull together, stress can cause conflicts or even looting. It's wise to have a means of self-defense, even a bat or pepper spray, but use it only if absolutely needed. Far more lives will be saved by working together calmly than by fighting. After 48 hours in the city, radiation will have declined greatly. At that point, you can start planning your next move. If your area is receiving official instructions, e.g., Sector 5, evacuate to X location now, follow them if possible, as authorities will try to guide people out of dangerous zones. If no info is coming, you might do a brief reconnaissance. Wear improvised PPE, long clothes, mask, and step outside for a few minutes to scout. Check for fires or hazards. Use a radiation meter if you have one. Don't stray far and come back quickly. This will give you a sense if it's safe to relocate or if you should stay put longer. Many urban survivors might eventually need to evacuate the city in the days following, especially if infrastructure is destroyed. No water, no food supply, risk of disease. Ideally, wait at least 2 days or more before any long journey to minimize fallout exposure. When you do move, avoid known hotspots -E-G- downwind areas that got heavy fallout. Emergency broadcasts might indicate these or surfaces where fallout might concentrate. Rooftops, clogged storm drains. In summary, city residents survive by sheltering hard and fast during the initial horrors, then cautiously emerging and likely evacuating. Your biggest threats in order are blast, duck and cover to survive it, fire smoke, move to safety if your building is burning, fallout radiation, stay indoors shielded until it decays. With presence of mind and some basic supplies, you can ride it out. There will be survivors in the cities, potentially many, but their fate hinges on effective shelter and avoiding that fallout in the first few days. If you live in a rural area or small town, you might not be near any nuclear blast at all, or you might be downwind of one. Rural regions won't be deliberately targeted as much. Warheads will be aimed at cities, bases, industrial centers. However, rural areas could face heavy fallout if they lie downwind of missile silos, bomber bases, command bunkers, or cities that were hit. The good news, being rural means you likely have access to open space, possibly a basement or storm cellar, and materials like dirt, wood, farm equipment that can help in building expedient shelters. You also avoid the chaos of urban density. Here's advice for those outside the blast zones. Know your proximity to targets. Before anything happens, it's wise to identify any likely nuclear targets near you. Are you within, say, 50 miles of an Air Force base, a missile silo field, a major city or port, a nuclear power plant, etc.? If yes, you might be in a fallout path or even blast zone if it's very close. If you're truly remote, e.g. 200 miles from any city, your direct risks are lower, but no place is entirely safe. In all-out war, fallout can travel. Understanding this helps you plan. If you're near a known target, you might focus on blast-resistant shelter, like a deeper underground spot. If you're far but downwind of targets, prevailing winds, often west to east, focus on fallout protection. Improvise fallout shelters. One advantage of rural living is you can build expedient shelters relatively easily with local materials. The gold standard is to use earth, dirt, as shielding. It's cheap and extremely effective at blocking gamma radiation. About 3 feet of earth can cut radiation by 1000x. If you have a basement, you can dramatically improve it. Pile sandbags or just boxes of dirt against the walls, especially the wall facing the likely fallout direction. If no basement, a simple expedient is to dig a trench in your yard. A 3 to 4 foot deep trench, big enough to lie in, with a strong door or boards over top, and then covered with 1 to 2 feet of dirt, makes a makeshift fallout shelter that gives excellent protection. Kani's nuclear war survival skills provides field-tested designs for such shelters that a small group can build in a day or 2 with shovels. If war tension is high, a rural family could pre-dig a trench shelter or at least gather materials, doors, sheet metal, plastic tarp for waterproofing, etc. to throw one together quickly. Other rural expedients. Existing structures like root cellars, storm shelters, septic tanks, wells can double as fallout shelters in a pinch. Use caution. For example, an empty concrete septic tank underground is essentially a pre-made bunker. Just ensure it's vented so you have air, and obviously don't share it with sewage. Culverts under roads, caves and hillsides, drainage tunnels. Any such subterranean spaces can be life-saving if fallout is heavy. The key is to get underground or under a heavy cover and stay there until radiation decays. Shielding in homes. If you have no better option than staying in your house, improve it. Go to the center of the house on the ground floor or basement. Put as many walls between you and outside as possible. Close all windows and push furniture against them or board them up. This helps block fallout dust from blowing in and offers some protection against blast winds. If you have a basement, do everything we suggested for urban basements. Line the outer walls with dense materials. Create a small protected space. You can even assemble a box within your basement out of heavy furniture or filled garbage bags of dirt/clothes to further shield you. Remove any flammable materials near you. In case embers from distant fires drift over. Less an issue in rural, but possible if forests catch fire. Don't stay in an attic or top floor. Fallout will settle on the roof, making that the worst place due to radiation coming down from above. If no basement, first floor is better than second. Farm equipment as shelter aids. On a farm or ranch, you might have tools to help. A backhoe or tractor can dig an expedient shelter quickly if you have even a few hours' notice. You can pile earth against one side of a building to make a berm. Especially if you shelter in the basement, piling earth along the outside walls can only help. Even parking vehicles around your shelter and heaping dirt on them can form an extra radiation barrier. Though note, a car or tractor by itself is thin metal and won't stop much radiation. It's the dirt or mass that matters. If you have lumber and nails, you can knock together bracing for a trench or pit shelter to prevent cave-ins and then cover with earth. Tarps or plastic sheets are good to line a trench shelter to keep moisture out. Rural folks often have things like barrels, which can be used for water storage or even as makeshift fire stoves outside, extra fuel, etc., all useful post-attack. Food and water safety. In rural areas, you likely have some stored food, canned goods, crops, livestock, and water sources, wells, ponds. Water. Fallout particles can contaminate open water, but usually only the surface. If you have a well, it's likely safe unless dust fell directly in the open wellhead. Most wells draw from aquifers that won't be significantly radioactively contaminated. For open sources, rain barrels, ponds, assume they have fallout in them until proven otherwise. You can still use that water by filtering and letting it sit. Radioactive dust will settle to bottom. Better yet, have water stored in closed containers prior to fallout arrival. It's recommended to store at least 2 weeks of drinking water, 1 gallon per person per day as a rough guide. Food. Stored dry/canned food will be fine. Crops in the field exposed to fallout might get a dusting of radioactive material. They can often be saved by washing or peeling, but avoid eating leafy veggies that got heavily dusted or wash very thoroughly. Livestock can graze after the fallout has been rained on or settled for a few weeks, but initially you'd want to keep animals under shelter or fed clean stored feed if possible, to avoid them ingesting fallout on pasture. Milk from cows that ate contaminated grass can have dangerous iodine, 131 for the first few weeks, a classic lesson from past fallout incidents. If you must use milk, consider only using milk from animals that were fed clean feed or use stored milk powder. Rural communities should coordinate. If only some wells are working or some areas are uncontaminated, share resources. Communication. Having a battery/hand crank radio in rural areas is crucial. You are far from authorities, so emergency broadcasts might be your only source of information on which areas were hit and where fallout is going. Government or local radio may instruct certain counties to evacuate or stay put. If phones and internet survive in your area, great. Use them, but don't count on it. Have a backup like a NOAA weather radio or ham radio receiver. Knowing when it's truly safe to come out will help you avoid unnecessary exposure. Long-term planning. Rural survivors might find themselves relatively unscathed physically, but suddenly cut off from supply chains. You should be ready for a long-term self-sufficiency period. This means storing not just food and water, but things like backup power, generator or solar panels, plus fuel, a large stock of any critical medications, seeds, and tools for growing food. You may need to plant a new crop next season if the first is ruined, and general supplies like batteries, lighting, candles, lanterns, first aid items, etc. In a nuclear aftermath, help may be slow to reach far-flung places. However, being rural also means less competition for local resources. You may have game in the woods, fish in ponds, wood for fuel, etc. Just be mindful of fallout on these. For example, wild game might have ingested fallout on plants, so for the first few weeks, hunting could expose you to radioactive animals, probably minor, but caution is wise. Maybe focus on eating stored food first and hunt after some rain has cleared the environment. CNES manual and FEMA guides include techniques for removing radioisotopes from water, e.g. using soil to filter out radioiodine key for you.com, and other advanced tips which are great if you want to go deeper. At minimum, plan to be on your own for a few weeks to a month. The cavalry, National Guard, FEMA will eventually mobilize, but their priority will be high population areas. Rural communities might actually fare better through neighborly mutual aid, bartering goods, pooling labor for rebuilding, etc. Mental preparedness. It might seem odd, but mindset is part of survival. Rural life can be isolating even on normal days. After a nuclear war, it might feel like you're the last people on Earth if communications are down. Stay busy and stay optimistic. Keep a routine, chores, hygiene, listening to radio at set times, caring for animals if any, etc. This gives structure and purpose. If you have family or neighbors with you, support each other, play cards, tell stories. These human elements will keep despair at bay. History from wartime sieges and disasters shows that people who engage in purposeful activity and maintain hope have much higher survival rates. Remember that in surrounding towns and farms, others are in the same boat. You are not alone, and outside help is likely working its way to you even if it takes time. Special note on suburban areas. Many people live in the suburbs, which are semi-urban, semi-rural. Suburbs might not be ground zero targets, but could be close enough to cities to suffer moderate blast damage or heavy fallout. If you're suburban, you can draw from both sections of advice. You probably have a house with a basement, use it, and some yard for a trench shelter if needed, but also more population density than a farm. One big hazard in suburbs is fire spread. Single-family homes, especially wood frame ones, can catch fire from the thermal pulse or from adjacent burning houses. If one house ignites, others on the street might follow. So, if you shelter in a suburban basement, still have a plan if your house catches fire. Maybe identify the nearest sturdy brick house or culvert, or even plan to shelter in a backyard fallout hole you dug. It's unlikely every house will burn, but some might. So know how to extinguish small fires. Keep an extinguisher or water buckets ready. On the plus side, suburbs often have community resources, schools or public buildings with basements designated as fallout shelters. Check if your area has them. Many suburbs also have pools, water source, and stores, food source, that, if not destroyed, could be raided for supplies later, though be mindful of contamination. Work with neighbors, a tight-knit subdivision that plans together, one family's basement for shelter, another's generator for power, etc., will do very well compared to isolated individuals. Regardless of location, when you become aware that a nuclear strike is imminent, minutes away, or just occurred, /blast. 1. Take cover instantly. Drop flat if you're in the open and can't get inside within seconds. Cover your head. If indoors, get to the safest spot you can, basement or interior. Duck and cover may sound old-fashioned, but it can save you from flying glass and the initial radiation flash, which can cause serious burns. The initial flash of light can cause temporary blindness if you face it, so turn away and cover eyes. 2. Stay inside and sheltered. Once the shockwave passes, which could be seconds to a minute after the flash, depending on distance, do not run outside to see what happened. Assume fallout is coming if the bomb was ground or if you're downwind. Your priority now is to seal yourself in a protected space. Shut off ventilation that brings outdoor air to prevent fallout dust ingress. Later, you'll ventilate carefully as needed. Use whatever you have to block cracks, towels under doors, tape on windows. This helps keep fallout particles out. Though it won't stop gamma rays, it stops ingestion/inhalation of radioactive dust. 3. Assist injured and secure essentials. If someone in your household is hurt by the blast, cuts, etc., do basic first aid. If your building is stable, quickly gather essential supplies into your shelter area: water, radio, flashlight, medicines, food, and sanitation items. You should have these pre-packed if you prepared, but if not, grab what's readily available within a couple minutes, no more. Every minute closer to fallout arrival counts. 4. Tune in for information. Turn on your radio. The EMP from nuclear bursts might disable some electronics, but battery-powered radios with short antennas are often fine. Modern electronics might reboot. Find emergency broadcast stations. In the US, the emergency alert system on AM/FM. Authorities will provide instructions. They might say which areas need to evacuate or stay put, or announce when additional waves of attack are over. Even if you hear nothing initially, keep checking periodically. The situation will evolve and information is critical. 5. Ration and reassure. Once in shelter, take stock of supplies. Ration water and food. You can survive on surprisingly little for 2 weeks. Plan for about 1 liter of water per day if possible, and a modest calorie intake. Reassure everyone that the plan is to stay put until it's safe. It's normal for people to panic or want to flee. Remind them that outside is deadly initially, and we must wait it out inside for at least 1 to 2 days, or as advised by officials. Use the time to rest if possible. You might be very busy after emerging, so conserve energy. 6. Plan your next move. After shelter period, while sheltered, think ahead. If you know your home area is likely heavily contaminated, plan an evacuation route before you go out. Maybe you've heard the nearest town 20 miles north was not hit and has a functioning hospital. That could be your destination when able. Or perhaps you have relatives 100 miles away. You'll attempt to drive there when roads clear. Have a plan B and C in case of roadblocks or lack of fuel. Small communities might set up assembly points for survivors. If you hear of those, mark them down. 7. Decontamination before exit. When you eventually leave your shelter, whether briefly or for good, decontaminate yourself to avoid bringing fallout along. That means wear clothes, including hat, gloves, mask, while outside, and when you come back in, take off that outer clothing layer and bag it or leave it outside. Wipe or wash exposed skin and hair. If you sheltered with pets, wipe them down too if they went outside. Radioactive dust can cling to fur. This routine is important if you do multiple forays outside. Keep your living area as free of fallout as possible. This immediate checklist, combined with the location-specific guidance above, gives you a solid action plan. It's a lot to absorb, but when broken into steps, it's manageable. Many of these actions are common sense in any disaster. Seek shelter, help others, listen for info, etc. Just with the radiation-specific twists, stay underground, watch out for fallout dust. Nuclear war is a terrifying prospect. There's no sugarcoating that. But as we've shown, it is not unsurvivable for those who are prepared and informed. Public fatalism that we'll all just die is not only inaccurate based on science and history, it's also dangerous because it discourages any effort to prepare or protect oneself. The reality is that tens or even hundreds of millions could survive a nuclear conflict, especially if they take proper action. And of course, if the war itself is limited in scope or uses smaller weapons, survival rates would be even higher. This comprehensive guide has addressed the myths that lead to fatalism, from exaggerated ideas of eternal radiation to the assumption of inevitable nuclear winter, and countered them with facts from civil defense research, Cold War studies, and modern science. We've painted a realistic, if sobering, picture of what a nuclear war would entail, and provided a playbook for how ordinary families can endure the initial horror and make it through to the other side. The key takeaways can be distilled into a few points. Distance and shielding save lives. Most people outside the immediate blast zones can survive if they get adequate shelter from fallout. Even simple actions like going to a basement or piling earth against walls can dramatically increase your survival chances. Time is your ally. Radiation intensity plummets after the first day or 2. If you can stay sheltered for 48 hours, and preferably up to 2 weeks in high fallout areas, you'll avoid the worst exposure. Patience is a survival virtue. Preparedness beats panic. Having supplies, water, food, medical, radio, tools, and a plan ahead of time is huge. But even if you're caught unprepared, knowledge, like what you've hopefully gained from this article, lets you think clearly and act wisely under pressure. Remember that panic and fatalism can do more harm than the disaster itself. For example, in one historical analogy, Londoners in World War II found that once they overcame fear of the Blitz bombs, they could function and survive much better. The same applies to nuclear threats. Community and cooperation, you're not in this alone. Encourage your family, neighbors, and friends to learn about civil defense. Maybe organize a local preparedness meetup or at least discuss if something happened, where would we meet, who has a basement, etc. In a post-nuclear scenario, local communities will be the first line of support. Those who band together, sharing skills, pooling resources, comforting each other, will fare far better than lone wolves. Preparedness is not just individual, it's communal. Finally, maintain hope. This guide is meant to be empowering. Just as one carries a fire extinguisher not because one expects a fire, but just in case. Learning how to survive nuclear war is like a life insurance policy for civilization. We hope these skills and strategies never have to be used. The best outcome is that humanity never fights a nuclear war. But knowing we could survive one helps dispel the paralyzing doom. It encourages leaders and citizens alike to invest in preparations, like maintaining fallout shelter infrastructure, stockpiling food, etc., which not only save lives in nuclear war, but also make us more resilient to any disaster. Nuclear war is not the end of the world, as long as we refuse to surrender to fear. Be aware, make a plan, and never give up. Should the worst occur, remember that your forebearers survived world wars, plagues, and worse. With the right steps, you and your family can survive nuclear war and help pick up the pieces in the aftermath. As bleak as the scenario is, there is genuine reason for optimism grounded in science and human perseverance. Stay safe, stay prepared, and spread the word. Survival is possible. Knowledge is not only power. In this case, knowledge is the key to survival. This is the DEFCON warning system.